He worked his whole life for that land. Sweat, sacrifice, and generations of history rooted in the soil. But one day, without his consent, strangers claimed it as their own. They didn't just trespass, they built 40 homes on what belonged to him. To them, it was progress. To him, it was theft in broad daylight. But what they didn't know was that beneath that stolen ground lay a secret weapon, one only he controlled. And when the moment came, he made a choice no one would ever forget. Before the storm, life on that land was simple. It wasn't just soil and grass, it was legacy. His father had tilled it. His grandfather had planted trees that still stood tall, and every corner carried a memory of struggle and survival. For him, the land was more than property. It was proof that his family had endured in a world that tried to erase them. Every morning, he walked the edges of the fields, watching the sun rise over the river that bordered his property. That river was life, beauty, and quiet strength. What he didn't know was that one day, it would become his only weapon. Then came the developers. At first, it was whispers, surveyors with clipboards, strangers eyeing his boundaries, men in suits who never looked him in the eye. He filed complaints, made phone calls, and showed the deeds proving his ownership. But the responses were always the same: delayed, dismissed, or ignored. Weeks turned to months, and then came the machines. The sound of hammers and saws pierced the silence that had once been his. One house rose, then another, and before long, 40 rooftops stood where his crops once grew. His heritage was buried under concrete. Neighbors told him to let it go, to move on. But deep inside, he couldn't. Each nail driven into the wood felt like a nail into his family's history. He wasn't just losing land, he was being erased. And with every sunrise, the weight of injustice grew heavier. Until one morning, as he stood by the river, staring at the dam he had quietly maintained for years, a thought crossed his mind, one that would change everything. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Surely someone would realize the land wasn't theirs to touch. But as weeks turned into months, the mistake grew into something bigger, something deliberate. Every day, he watched heavy trucks roll past his front porch, kicking up dust that coated his windows. Every evening, he returned from town to see more walls rising where his crops once grew. 40 homes, 40 strangers claiming what was his. He tried everything: letters to the city, phone calls to officials, meetings that ended in polite smiles but empty promises. He even showed the paperwork, yellowed with age but signed, sealed, undeniable. Still, the answer never changed: there's nothing we can do. Each rejection chipped away at his hope, but fueled something else inside him: anger. He wasn't just losing land. He was watching history stolen in broad daylight. And the worst part? No one cared. One afternoon, as he stood at the edge of the property, a man in a suit waved him off. "You should be grateful," the man said. "This is progress." Grateful. The word burned like fire. Progress for who? Certainly not for him. He turned his eyes to the river. Calm, steady, flowing just as it always had. They had no idea what lay beneath their new paradise. No idea of the dam, hidden from view, holding back more power than they could imagine. But he knew. And each day, as hammers rang and children played in yards built on stolen soil, that thought returned. What if? What if he simply opened it? Still, he hesitated. Revenge carried weight, and water carried destruction. Could he cross that line? For nights, he wrestled with the choice. Sleep eluded him. Every creak of the construction became a reminder of what they'd taken. And then came the day that broke him. Returning home, he found the old oak tree, planted by his grandfather, cut down to make way for a driveway. The tree that had shaded generations of his family, the living marker of his heritage, was gone. It was no longer just about land. It was about erasure. He walked to the riverbank that night, the sound of rushing water in his ears. The dam loomed ahead, silent, waiting. His hand hovered over the mechanism, his heart pounding. Behind him, 40 homes slept peacefully, unaware of what was coming. But the question pressed harder than ever. Could he do it? Could he unleash the flood? The night was heavy with silence. broken only by the constant roar of water pressing against the dam. He stood there, staring at the steel wheel that held everything back. His chest tightened, his hands trembled. Years of pain, humiliation, and betrayal boiled inside him. In the distance, the glow of street lamps lit up the rows of new houses, 40 homes standing tall, built on stolen ground. Families slept inside, unaware that the soil beneath them was never theirs. To the world, it was just a neighborhood. To him, it was a wound that refused to heal. His fingers curled around the wheel. The metal was cold, unyielding. For a moment, he hesitated, visions of his grandfather planting the oak tree, his father working the fields. His own sweat poured into every inch of that land. Could he really do this? Then he remembered the laughter of the developers, the dismissive tone of officials, the word progress thrown at him like an insult. They hadn't just taken land. They had taken dignity, legacy, and voice. With a deep breath, he turned the wheel. Slowly at first, then harder. The locks groaned, the earth seemed to shudder, and then it happened. A thunderous crack split the night. Water, furious and unstoppable, surged forward like a beast freed from its cage. The river broke loose, rushing across the land with violent force. Within minutes, streets became rivers. Lights flickered and died. Panic erupted as the flood swallowed yards, cars, and foundations. He stood at the bank, watching, not with joy, but with something deeper, a grim silence. He had unleashed justice in the only language left to him. And yet, as the screams carried through the night, one question cut through his resolve like a knife. Had he gone too far? By morning, the neighborhood was unrecognizable. Streets that once echoed with hammers and laughter now lay silent beneath a blanket of mud and wreckage. Walls had collapsed, cars were overturned, and the proud row of new houses stood broken, lifeless. The price of stolen land had been paid in full. He stood at the riverbank, soaked by mist, staring at what he had done. There was no triumph in his eyes, only the weight of a man who had run out of choices. He hadn't wanted destruction, he had wanted justice. But when no one listened, when every door was shut, this was the only voice he had left. Reporters swarmed. Officials who had once ignored him now spoke his name. To some, he was a criminal. To others, a hero who had reclaimed what was his. But to him, he was simply a man defending his family's legacy the only way he knew how. And the questions lingered. What if they had listened sooner? What if the courts had honored his ownership instead of dismissing it? What if one man hadn't been forced to unleash a flood just to be seen? Because this story isn't just about land. It's about a history of being pushed aside, a legacy of promises broken, and the silence that follows when injustice is ignored. His dam broke that night, but the deeper truth is that it never should have come to that. So the question remains, how many more stories like his will it take before people finally understand that stolen land is more than property? It's stolen history, stolen dignity, and stolen life?